Good afternoon, or good morning, depending on when you're watching this. Welcome to Lecture 4 on contracts from the studios of WCLG. So I have a confession to make. Last lecture I talked to you about force majeure. Well, I noticed that I spelled majeure incorrectly on the whiteboard. It is M-A-J-E-U-R-E. So that's the way you should put it in your notes. M-A-J-E-U-R-E. But today we're going to talk about the performance or non-performance of contracts. A contract can end in many different ways. We'll talk about what happens with the breach of a contract and damages in another lecture. But today we're going to talk about the way to perform or get out of performance. The most likely way to end a contract is to perform it. People normally do what they say they're going to do. Most people perform their promises most of the time. Think about your own life. If you have an agreement with somebody, and it's normally an informal agreement, it's not written down or it's not even a handshake. If you just agree to do something for somebody, you normally do it. Most people perform most of the time. Now, one of the factors in performing a contract is whether or not the performance is substantial, well, whether or not the non-performance is a substantial breach of the contract or a minor breach. If it's a minor breach, most of the time people don't care. Most of the time there's no remedy for a very minor breach. But if you have a substantial breach of that contract, then you will have a material breach of your contract, and there is likely to be some damages associated with that. But just remember, the normal way to end a contract is that the parties perform what they say they will do. Another way is by rescission. Rescission means that the parties themselves cancel or terminate the agreement themselves. They rescind it, and therefore they all agree that there's no contract. Now, a similar concept to rescission is called novation. Novation is when the parties agree that one party gets out of the contract and they add another party. The parties are agreeing to that, so that the third party comes in with the agreement of the first two parties. You can take a look at the rescission and novation on page 72 in the text. Now, a third way that a contract is ended is by operation of law. That some law comes up and affects the contract. And we're going to talk about three of those concepts right now. The first is statute of limitations. S-O-L. Now, it doesn't mean what you think it means. It means statute of limitations. So, statute of limitations is the time after which one party cannot enforce the contract with another party. For example, you cannot enforce a written contract in California after 4 years from the execution of that contract, or actually from the breach of that contract. So, if you wait for 4 years after a written contract, you cannot enforce it. If it's an oral contract, it's 2 years. You only have 2 years after the breach of that contract to sue the other party for the breach. And remember, once the statute of limitations runs, there is no way to go back and get it enforced. Another way is that contracts can be discharged in bankruptcy. For example, if I have a contract with you and I file bankruptcy, and then I file bankruptcy and I put my contract into the bankruptcy, I get discharged from my obligation to pay that contract. And there's nothing you can do. You are forced to accept the order of the court that your obligation under that contract is discharged. Now, another way that operation of law is the impossibility of performance. Remember, in last lecture, we talked about impossibility and impracticality. For example, again, if I'm going to sell my Ford Ranger to you, and we've agreed on a price and a delivery for tomorrow, but lightning strikes the car and the truck and burns it up, we're done. The contract cannot be performed. So those are some of the ways that the contracts are discharged by either performance or by operation of law. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you again.